After the German occupation of Poland in September 1939, the Nazis wanted to create a holding place for Jews to keep them away from the general populace and a place where they could send Jews from other occupied areas. They chose to create a ghetto in Łódź, which had been the capital city and which was located in the central part of Poland. The Łódź ghetto was created by combining two very old and run-down sections of Łódź, Baludi and Old Town. Within the Łódź ghetto, the Nazis appointed Mordecai Chaim Rumkowski as the elder of the Judenrat, or leadership of the ghetto. He was to oversee the ghetto and do as the Nazis instructed. On September 23, 1941, Rumkowski had his Jewish New Year celebration cut short by a summons from German authorities to meet with them at the Balut market. The Germans told Rumkowski that an additional 20,000 Jews were being sent to Łódź, and that about 5,000 gypsies from eastern Austria were also on their way. The population of the ghetto on November 1st, 1941 was almost 160,000 people, all in a space of just under 1,000 acres. On November 1st, 1941, Rumkowski gave a speech to the ghetto residents which gave a clear indication of how he felt about some of the new residents, the people commonly referred to as gypsies.
We are forced to take about 5,000 gypsies into the ghetto. I've explained that we cannot live together with them. Gypsies are the sort of people who can do anything. First they rob, and then they set fire, and soon everything is in flames, including your factories and materials.
The ethnic group people often call gypsies are actually people who migrated to Europe from northern India in about 1300 current era. Europeans mistakenly thought they came from Egypt, which is where the term gypsy comes from. The proper term for them today is actually Roma or Romani, and in Germany they are called the Sinti. They were known for living in caravans and traveling the countryside. Here is a glimpse of what the life as a gypsy was like before the Nazis came to power. This is footage from a Sinti encampment near Berlin in 1932, just as Hitler and the Nazi Party were ascending to power. As a rule, the Roma and Sinti are fairly asocial, having a distrust of the Gaje, or non-gypsies. Because Roma were nonconformists and refused to be confined to a sedentary life, they were an easy target for persecution. In Germany, there was a steady progression of persecution of the Roma and the Sinti. This persecution corresponded fairly closely with that of the Jews. In Hitler's vision of a pure, great Aryan Germany, not only Jews but also gypsies presented a problem. The first transport carrying the gypsies arrived at the Radagaz station in Łódź on November 5th, 1941. A gypsy camp had been set up in the blocks of houses on the border of the ghetto at Brzezinska Street and contained just 15 buildings with only 543 rooms total. The gypsy camp was just 47 acres. Creating this ghetto within a ghetto meant Jews already occupying the buildings had to be moved out and relocated into already overcrowded buildings outside the gypsy camp. To keep the gypsies contained and away from Jews, 2 separate barbed wire fences and a small moat filled with water were built around the gypsy camp. The camp was heavily guarded. Gypsy guards stood at the inside of the barbed wire barriers. Jewish ghetto police patrolled the outside, where the gypsy camp met the Jewish ghetto streets, and German police patrolled outside the barbed wire containment, where it butted up against the Aryan side. Conditions in the gypsy camp were even worse than in the rest of the ghetto. At first, the gypsies were allowed to play their violins and guitars, and Jews who lived on the other side of the barbed wire fences could hear the gypsy music. But soon the Germans forbade any more music. Silence ensued, interrupted only by the screams from the tortured prisoners. Drunken German soldiers attacked the gypsy section at night, beating and raping the prisoners. They smashed all the windows of the houses, exposing the weakened, starving gypsy prisoners to the bitter winter cold. A Jewish doctor who entered the gypsy section to give medical care wrote of what he saw there.
What I saw in the 2 rooms was horrifying. The rooms I saw from the corner of my eye did not even have any plank beds, let alone real beds. The floor, scattered with straw and covered with rags, served as the place to sleep for 100 residents of that anthill. It was shocking. Situating the gypsy camp in a few buildings detached from the ghetto was a factor that in a peculiar way boosted the morale of the Jewish population. The news that reached the ghetto about the conditions in which the gypsies lived improved the morale of the Jews enclosed in the ghetto, because it meant it was not they who were at the bottom of degradation, misery, hunger. There was no compassion in the ghetto for the gypsies, as most likely there was no compassion among the gypsies for the Jews. The executioner allowed the victims to observe each other.
Typhus became epidemic within the gypsy camp. 613 gypsies died from November to the end of December. Their mortality rate was double that of the rest of the ghetto. The hearse would start picking up the gypsy dead by 6 a.m. and continue throughout the day. One worker in the Jewish cemetery stated that he had buried gypsies, old people, and young children, all of the corpses battered, and some with marks indicating they had been hanged, rather than having died of natural causes. Later, he found that gypsies had been ordered to hang their own kin. Many of the bodies were hacked apart and had broken arms and legs. A doctor indicated that he had been forced to sign death certificates, stating that the victims had died of a heart problem, when actually the cause of death had been hanging or suffocation. Whatever happened in that small section of Łódź, the Germans were not telling, and there was no one speaking out for the gypsies. Bodies of the dead from the gypsy camp were buried in a specially isolated portion of the Jewish cemetery. Even in death, they were isolated and rejected. By January 1st, 1942, the Łódź ghetto population was 162,681 souls. In a speech by Rumkowski in January 1942, he explained the most recent selection process to meet Nazi demands for reducing the population of the ghetto.
I assigned for deportation that element of our ghetto which was a festering boil, and so the list of exiles includes members of the underworld and other individuals harmful to the ghetto.
In January 1942, those gypsies who survived the typhus epidemic were loaded onto 3-ton trucks, 200 or 300 people at a time, until the gypsy camp was empty. The trucks drove to the extermination camp of Helmno on the river Nur. The authorities told the gypsies that they would be fed and transferred to a work camp, but that first they had to bathe and have their clothes disinfected. Guards took the gypsies 2 by 2 into the camp building, up a flight of stairs and into a heated room. They told the inmates to undress and then walk downstairs wearing only their underwear. Then they were to walk through a doorway marked with a sign, "To the bath." They were told they would travel to the bathhouse in a covered truck. At that point, the guards dropped the pretense, beating the prisoners and forcing them into the truck, which was actually a mobile gas chamber. The truck doors slammed shut, the motor roared, and engine exhaust poured into the sealed van. Screaming and moaning penetrated the walls of the van. 5 long minutes of these terrible sounds. Then the screaming subsided. Guards drove the van to a nearby forest and dumped the corpses. They then returned to the camp building to load the next group of gypsies going to the bathhouse. Of the now empty gypsy camp, Sarah Ziskind, a Jewish survivor who was in the Łódź ghetto, writes in her book, The Light in the Valley of Tears.
None of those gypsies survived. Their houses were disinfected and included in the ghetto again. The wires were rolled up, the traces of blood on the walls painted over, no traces of crime.
By February, the Jews of the Łódź ghetto, in their quest to survive life in the interim, as the ghetto experience has been called, probably thought very little, if at all, of the 5,007 gypsies who had shared their ghetto. On June 10, 1944, 29 months after the gypsies were deported to Helmno, Heinrich Himmler ordered the complete liquidation of Łódź ghetto. August 4th, 1944, saw the very last transport leave Łódź for the killing center at Auschwitz. On that final transport was Rumkowski and his young bride. Because the Roma had a distrust of outsiders, they historically avoided census takers and local governments, making it difficult to know how many of them lived in Europe before World War II. This makes it impossible to put a realistic figure on the death toll from the actions of the Nazis. It is estimated that between 500,000 and 1.5 million Roma and Sinti died during Hitler's reign of terror. This would mean that as a percentage of the overall European population of the Roma and Sinti, they suffered similar losses to the European Jewry, who lost approximately 6 million of their population. But perhaps, in some ways, their early deaths gave the gypsies an easier time than the other residents of Łódź. As time went on in the ghetto, food became even more scarce, and death came to many even before the final transports to Auschwitz began.